try to summarize what, to me, look as the most relevant assumptions of the work we have done so far with SoPHIA. Let's imagine that we are crossing a river, and let's enumerate the stepping stones that we have already put in our path to go beyond. And then I will propose you some areas for further reflection. So I'm not contributing basically, but with questions, open questions and suggestions where to concentrate our common effort, because I'm very receptive to the idea that on one side we are working in our individual local teams, but when we meet together, I think it is a very precious time to exchange ideas and also to be free to discuss and to question everything that we have collected so far. So let's start with our stepping stones. Of course, there are a lot of assumptions. I mean, there was, as Michaela, as Mercedes, and Nicholas have already said, an important work that we have done before starting the process, and also in the first 6 months of activities. So I will not do full justice to all these things. I will only concentrate on some highlights. I have come not even to a decalogue, because I will stop at 8 relevant points. It's not to say that there are no other assumptions that are relevant, but those to me are very important and deserve our attention. So the first point is that, yes, intervening on cultural heritage produce impacts, and those impacts can be investigated in many forms. Some are traditional, like looking in literature, in practices, in policies, and we have that important dimension that is social platforms. So that is, I think, an important assumption, and it deserves to be appreciated in full. Third assumption is that the impacts are best appreciated when seen in a holistic perspective that includes, probably is not limited to, at least 4 domains, that is cultural, social, economic, environmental. And as I list those domains, I always realize that they are immense, they are huge, they are very vast, and they are very controversial. Something that we have learned, or better, probably we knew already, is that behind each of them, you have a variety of views, and you have also conflictual views. That is a relevant aspect that I think we should bear in mind. 4, we have appropriate interventions and we have inappropriate interventions. Both of them produce impacts. So when we have appropriate intervention, we have sustainable growth, we have social cohesion, we can expect the well-being of local communities to increase, we can expect that cultural tourism is sustainable. But we also have a range of evidence that inappropriate intervention may lead to complaints, to say the least, but also to damage of irrepressible historical elements, their environment, or tangible heritage, identities, and social practices, and negative perception of the citizens of the action supported by the EU. That is also another kind of consequence of impact that we should bear in mind. And the last 3 assumptions are that in each domain, in all the things that we encounter in our research, the subjective perspective deserves a constant attention. It is a very difficult matter to tackle. we are probably less, we master fewer instruments in respect to that, but the subjective perspective is very relevant. And the two final points are about what we know we lack. We lack a common understanding of the requirement for the quality of restoration and other interventions. We feel the need for those requirements, but we know we lack a common understanding of those requirements. And also we lack shared standards for the holistic impact assessment. We all know, we acknowledge it is necessary, but there are no shared standards so far, despite we have important directives in that dimension. Now, what I will do next, and I'm really committed to keep my minutes in time, is simply to highlight. I feel like I have a very weak and a small torch to highlight some points. Of course, there are other many points that in the great activity we have done so far in our work that has been very, very abundant in terms of volumes. There are so many other things that we could pinpoint. But let me shed my little light on some of them in form of questions, in form, let's say, also of concerns that I would ask you together, now that we have this incredible opportunity to convene together to discuss together. So let's start about a key notion, assessment. We all, I mean, and when I say we, I think of the consortium and academics and operators of different kinds. We have often compelled, and we are warmly invited by our partners, decision makers, institutions, funders, journalists. We are continuously demanded for simple, striking, clear-cut, linear, self-evident information, possibly in form of numbers, of measurements. Those who know me, they know also that I'm okay with numbers. I have a very good relationship with numbers, but I would like to question if it is measurement what we have in mind. And I think that we have a lot of, we have a palette of instruments, and we should explore all of them: description, account, appraisal, assessment, and evaluation. And I think that often what we can offer, what we can guarantee, what is reliable, are not clear-cut, linear, self-evident, simple, flat information, but are complex and in-depth analysis. We have often tentative explanations. We are not 100% sure about them, nuanced responses. And I would like to say that in my view, they are okay. And I think we can offer them as a very sound and reliable and high quality contribution. And of course, it is always possible to translate rich and qualitative analysis into a few numbers. The reverse is not always possible. So I would like to have the idea that assessment is a delicate and subtle art. I also would like to be frank and be confronted with the problem that we have areas of weakness when we assess the impacts of cultural heritage. I mean, the impacts of interventions in cultural heritage. I will just mention 3 of those areas. There are other, but I would like to shed my small light on those 3. First is the causality links issue. It is very difficult, but it is also crucial that we are able to establish a causal relationship between the transformation that we observe and the cultural practices that we are assessing. Otherwise, we can only speak of associated phenomena. We observe A and we observe B, but we do not know what is the relationship between the two. We cannot be sure. And I think that is a very important intellectual challenge to us. The second point is about the opportunity cost issue. This is something that costs me a lot to admit, because personally, I'm very interested and engaged in the relationship between culture, arts, and well-being and health. And I'm sure, I mean, one of the basic assumptions in my own field of research is that we do have a possibility to using culture to produce immense benefits in terms of well-being and health. But the point is, are those the most cost-effective? And I think we are still lagging behind. We are not clear evidence about the fact that if indeed we have some relevant impacts and benefits passing through the way of culture and cultural heritage and the arts, we have often not a clear evaluation or a clear assessment of the fact that they are most cost effective. And the third point introduces the notion of time, the time dimension in our reflection, is the question of outcome versus outputs. Often we can measure outputs, and outputs are revealed. They can become manifest in the short term or in a short time span. And when we discuss with politicians and journalists and some irrelevant stakeholders, they insist for having, in the short term, some responses from us. This is I mean, it is the pace, it is the rhythm of institutions, it's the rhythm of politics. But outcomes may skip one generation. Outcomes may reveal themselves in the long run. And so we are always confronted with solving that approach, or at least to be aware that often we may be able to assess outputs, not outcomes. Another question, another concern to me is that we must be very clear that we must be aware that who assesses changes a lot the result of assessment. So assessment is not neutral. Assessment involves the assessor. And the reason why the assessor, or I mean, the person asking to the technicians for assessment, are bearers of interests, of reasons, of rationales. So we must be aware that we have to address the point of the reasons of assessment, and again, the nature of cultural heritage as a possible area of conflict and of contrasting values must be taken into consideration. You see, this is something that was very clear to me during these first months of work, and when I read documents, let's say, for instance, the rather good indicators proposed by UNESCO for the Sustainable Development Goals, often I react when I found a very plain evaluation of everything traditional as good per se. In the recent weeks, we have seen how cultural heritage can be ideos and how it may be interpreted as oppressive, as racist, as imperialist, and to be attacked as the physical demonstration, physical testimony of something that is against some groups. So we must be very aware that there are many possible interpretations and many possible uses of different groups, and without calling for those ideological and delicate matters, just think of the different impacts that the same intervention can have on any piece of physical cultural heritage if it is meant for a large tourism use, or say for a local religious use. Just think of the mere conflict of tourists wanting to take picture during a sacred ceremony, and the participant in the ceremony being irritated because of that. So who assesses and why is very important. And I come to the reasons for assessments. And so far, and with the help of François Matarasso, I think we have monitoring, evaluation, and advocacy as great reasons for assessing the impacts. I would add advancing knowledge. I think we need to explore more, and it is very important that through this program we have the means, the investment, and the resources to make knowledge advance in this direction. But I also think that if we keep in mind the monitoring, evaluation, and advocacy among the possible reasons why we must provide good tools for assessment, I think we can be very good with that. And again, who for? Who is the change brought about for? And what needs are to be met? There is an important, cultural change in these years. We have this slow coming into light from the margins, as the Council of Europe would say, of the people, the local communities, the visitors, the public, at the center of our attention. So, and who are they? And is the change undesirable or harmful to anyone? Because again, when we choose for, we always choose not to, or we choose against some other interests. And the last question is about the active or passive role of those who are supposedly supposed to benefit from the interventions we are making. So, thank you.